الحمد لله رب العالمين صلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and welcome to Islamic Oasis Live. Today we have a very, very interesting discussion that is going on that we're going to have, inshallah, with a very, of course, very interesting scholar. Of course, the title we have kept, the title is In the Twilight of Osman's Dream. And inshallah, I think the discussion itself will show why we gave it that name and what we're going to discuss. Of course, the discussion, as we mentioned in the past or in the descriptions for this show, we're talking about Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani. Many of you know Shaykh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani, and you know his works. If you don't know his works, that's another person that you want to go and study. And of course, now we're talking about his father or his grandfather. And the kind of role that he played, not only in the affairs of the Muslims, kind of basically the life and times of Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani, the concepts, the ideas of the time, what he was dealing with, and the movements that were happening. And of course, as many of you know, brothers, this happened in a very critical time. The timings was, you have the Young Turks there, you have the issue of the Khilafah being at its weakest moments. You have movements that are coming up in order to figure out what needs to be done, what will be the steps if the Khilafah falls. The secularists are coming out, the modernists, secularists are coming out, and all of them are one. Now you also have scholars, at least in the name of Islam, they're speaking the name of Islam, and there was a lot of ideas that were being discussed. So what we're going to do here, inshallah, we're going to bring Dr. Yusuf or Dr. Chowdhury here. Dr. Chowdhury, he's been on this show before, and we've had very awesome discussion on Sharia and discussions on different scholars and how they view the Sharia and things like this. So we have, inshallah, Dr. Safaruk Chowdhury, studied philosophy at King's College London, completing it with accompanying associate of King College Award. He then traveled to Cairo, studying traditional Islamic studies curriculum at Al-Azhar University. He returned to UK to complete his MA at the School of Oriental and African Studies with distinction. His doctoral dissertation was on the eminent Sufi biographer and theologian Abu Abdul-Rahman al-Sulami, published as a Sufi apologist of Nizapur, the life and thought of Abu Abdul-Rahman al-Sulami. And then Saf's research interest in addition to Sufism at the moment are in paraconsistent logic. Subhanallah. Sheikh, how do you even, subhanallah, and the metaphysics, ethics, epistemology, with keen interest in how these subjects were all utilized for clarifying and explicating Islamic theological doctrine, especially within the Kalam and theology. So, Dr. Chowdhury, welcome to Islamic Oasis Live.
Thank you, Sheikh, for having me. Assalamu alaikum.
Sheikh, walaikum salam. How do you accomplish all of this in one lifetime? Some of the stuff, mashallah, trying to even, I'm just trying to read the, mashallah, Allah Mubarak.
No, wallah. I thank you for the generous introduction, but it really it's I'm nobody. The figure we're going to be looking at today, subhanallah, one of the beautiful, Sheikh, shining
Sheikh, let me ask you
this, of this ummah.
Taban, I before we go into this discussion, even when we study scholars or when we study thoughts of scholars, I think it's also very important that the people who study these scholars, they themselves have a certain level of thought to be able to understand the person that they're reading or the person that is speaking in front of them, especially if they're scholars. What do you think about that, Sheikh? How important is it that when we are doing these types of studies, that it calls for a certain level of a mind? Is that important when we're studying such scholars?
Yeah, okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Sheikh, it's great to be on this platform with you. I wish, inshallah, with you and the team, not in virtually, but in person, inshallah. May Allah
Inshallah.
bless the team, bless your work, give it tawfiq. You're doing great. You're doing great stuff.
And we will talk about that.
To the right
we actually, there's a way to meet, and I need you to actually come on that platform. But we'll talk about that after the show. There is you just mentioned something amazing. There is an opportunity, Sheikh, to actually let's discuss that. But
inshallah. But on the point that you mentioned about should thinkers be studying thinkers or should thinkers be studying scholars, I wish I was a level of a mufakkir or a scholar, but I think you're you're absolutely right. That you can study a scholar merely in abstraction, i.e., you look at the sort of hard facts about someone, the statistical data, where they were born, how many books they wrote, and who said what and when. But I think as Muslims, when we study our ulama, it's important that we understand why were our ulama writing the books or doing the kind of work that they were doing. That, I think, will then get us to start pondering, right, so what makes them significant at their moment in time? Otherwise, we can just end up studying a scholar as a kind of data, have a data sheet of a scholar. But we want to know why our ulama wrote the things that they did. What was in their mind? What were they reacting to? Once we understand that, then we can start to think, okay, is this something that parallels our situation? Were the tensions that they were put under, are they the same tensions we under right now? And things like that. So, for example, just to give you another example, although it's not related to Imam Yusuf al-Nabhani radiallahu anhu, but in India, we had the sort of pre-partition era where you had that composite nationalism, where Muslims, some ulama in Hind were calling for, that ittihad al-qawmiyya, that kind of al-qawmiyya al-muttahida, that united nationalism, where a Muslim and a Hindu can be united under sort of a nationalist umbrella, and someone like Allama Zafar Usmani, rahmatullah alayhi, he wrote a refutation of that.
Yes.
See, but why did he put that in his I'la' Sunan, which is a masterpiece of Hanafi evidence, right? For evidences, hadith evidence for Hanafi opinions. But in his comment in that book, I'la' Sunan, he stops and in a section he writes a refutation of that. So his work, I'la' Sunan, is it shows you what the debates and the thoughts and the arguments and ideas and tensions were at the time. And why is this relevant? For example, like now, some Muslim scholars are calling for a kind of united umbrella front, We should be joining the government. We should be being involved in the system. Whereas Allama Zafar Usmani, rahmatullah alayhi, he felt that's dangerous. If you align with the Hindus, political way, they're going to ditch you. And then we see that happening after the partition. Yeah.
So is it... so, look, there's a lot that you said there. Because, a lot happened. Even if you look at what happened to Deoband after the supposed independence, where they were before the independence as a movement, what happened to them after, and where they are today. Sheikh, so do you think that what we are seeing today, let's say where Deoband is today, is that because they lacked the understanding of Nanotwi rahmatullah alayh or Shah Kashmiri rahmatullah alayh? I mean, I'm going to get to the topic. It's just I wanted to know, because, they have the same books. The books are available. The books of all of those scholars that wrote books at that time before the partition or before the independence, these books were there, but those books are not understood by today's ulama that way. And I'll give you an example so that you can expand on this. for example, when we're talking about today's realities, let's say Gaza, for instance, we had some teachers, scholars, students come from the madrasa backgrounds, and they're all obviously the Deobandis and this and that. So when we were discussing, I posed a question saying that, look, if we're going to go back to history and if we're trying to find out what should be done today, many of the students, madrasa background students, or who are studying in the the seminaries or these madaris, especially if they're studying in the Deoband background, they should already know what should be done, because the original books for why even Deoband was formed was to remove the British from India. So why? But today's Deoband are not anything close to those people. And is that because of not being able to understand the realities of these scholars and the times of these scholars?
Well, I mean, you ask, Sheikh, you ask a massive question. Now, this is to do with a maslak, a way, and a manhaj of a school. So Deoband being a school, of course, it has some core precepts and ideas and markers and signifiers. But the ulama of Deoband are on a spectrum. Each of the great luminaries, they had their own inclinations and different posturing and positions when it comes to political matters. So I don't know to what extent someone can say, or how someone can judge whether a graduate of Darul Ulum Deoband has strayed or has remained faithful to Maulana Qasim Nanotvi rahmatullah alayhi, his founding sort of vision. So with the example of the united nationalism or composite nationalism, Sheikh al-Hind, Maulana Madani, he felt that harmonious coexistence and sort of multi-racial, multi-religious context is Islamic, and that is what Muslims should be encouraged to build. Whereas Allama Zafar Usmani, two great intellectual giants of Deoband. So Allama Zafar Usmani, total opposite.
Yeah, that's what I was asked. Yes, that's what I'm, I guess, trying to figure out. Yeah.
Yeah, but so you're going to get you're inevitably going to get a spectrum of views when you have a school. When you have a school. Now, I am not the best placed to say and to evaluate and judge whether a great luminary of Deoband has remained faithful to the vision of Maulana Qasim Nanotvi rahmatullah alayhi. That's an internal debate that's happening between contemporary Deobandi kharrijeen, so graduates, and those who are the stalwarts or the torchbearers of the original Akabir. Now that's a big debate and discussion that is going on internally within the scholars of Deoband or those who are affiliated to Deoband. So it's a big question. Is there just a one track?
That would be a very interesting discussion. We should have that one day.
For sure.
But let's going back to this topic, Sheikh, here. Of course, also Abu Yusuf or Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani, he obviously is coming from the Hanafi background. Am I correct in saying that?
Oh, I think he's Shafi'i, although he had Shaykh Yusuf Ismail al-Nabhani, ibn Ismail al-Nabhani. Obviously, he studied with Hanafi shuyukh, but he
did study at the Hanafi school. Then he comes out although he's Shafi'i in his own when it comes to ijtihad and things like this.
Yeah. I mean, he's known. Obviously, he knows Hanafi. He knows the fiqh. He was a qadi as well, as I'll mention about his biography. But primarily, he was a Shafi'i.
He's a
Shafi'i, rahimahullah.
Sheikh now, Allah
Yeah.
yarhamu. So what's his background? That's what I want to get. What's his background? What's the
Okay.
books that he's written? What other major?
Yeah.
Now, let's study this man.
Uh,
You know,
Subhanallah. I mean, look.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, please.
No. What I was
Shahzad,
saying
go,
is just looking at the books that Shaykh Taqiyuddin Nabhani has written. I mean, I can imagine the brain of this man. Allah yarhamu, yani rahmatullah alayh. So introduce him to us, Shaykh. Who is he, and why do we have to, or we must study him?
Oh, subhanallah. Look, Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani is one of my dearest, most favorite ulama ever. You know, and so, yeah, it always delights me, and I'm honored to be given the opportunity, however little time we may have, to talk about him, rahimahullah. Now, just to give a snapshot about him from his own sort of snippets of biography there, he was Yusuf bin Ismail bin Muhammad, rahimahullah. So his father was Ismail, and his name is Yusuf. He was a poet. He's known as a poet. He wrote many books. He was a qadi. He was one of the peerless lovers of the Messenger of Allah, one of the ushaq of Nabi alayhi afdalu salat wa atammu taslim. He tells us, rahimahullah, that he was from the town of Ijzim, north of Palestine, and presently, I think, presently, Haifa in Akka, province in the province of Beirut. And he was born around 1849, 1850, approximately, he tells us. He studied with his father, Ismail, rahimahullah, who was one of the well-known shuyukh, righteous shuyukh, Hafiz, and he calls him, one of the most meticulous memorizers of the Quran, one of the most meticulous hufaz of the Quran. So Imam Yusuf al-Nabhani says his father was, when he wrote parts of his biography, I think in 1891, his father had passed 80 and he was still in full possession of all of his senses. He was in excellent health, and most of the time he was in ibadah. And so he was under the tutelage of his father, Ismail al-Nabhani, rahimahullah, early on. And then his father decided to send him to, as most people would at that time, send him to Al-Azhar Sharif in Cairo. And he entered Cairo on a Saturday in the year, I think the month of Muharram, around 1282, 1283, which is roughly Gregorian 1866, 67. And he was there for about 3 or 4 years. So there until 1880. I think it was there until 1889 or something like that initially. So he was there for a total of about, many, many years he was there in Cairo. And that time he learned all the sciences of the Sharia. He learned the preparatory ulum, and one of the shuyukh that he talks about, that he studied under, was Shaykh Ibrahim al-Saqqa al-Shafi'i, who died in about 1298, 1300, something like that. Allah knows best. We can fact check the exact dates. And so he mentions that, Shaykh Ibrahim al-Saqqa was one of the greatest Shafi'i scholars, fuqaha, at the time. But he studied with many other shuyukh. He studied with another great scholar at the time, Sayyid Muhammad Damanhuri, another Shafi'i, a great Shafi'i scholar. He studied with Shaykh Ibrahim Zurru al-Khalili, another Shafi'i. He studied with Shaykh Ahmed Ajhuri al-Darir al-Shafi'i, the blind Shafi'i. He studied with Hassan al-Adawi, a Maliki scholar. He studied with Hanafi shuyukh as well. for example, Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Rafi'i al-Hanafi al-Tarablusi. He studied with Hanbalis, Yusuf al-Barqawi, Shaykh Yusuf al-Barqawi. So he read many mutun, and he studied with these Shaykh various disciplines. And so, he tells us, rahimahullah, that after he graduated from Al-Azhar, and after living there for a few years, he came back to Idzim, to Palestine, and then, he was involved in teaching in various madaris. He travelled frequently to Beirut, to Damascus, where he met other ulama. For example, in Damascus, he met Sayyid al-Sharif Mahmoud Effendi Hamza, and he got ijazah from him. He got ijazah from all of his shuyukh, pretty much, that he studied with. So, he's around the Levant, he's around Asham, travelling, teaching. And then he travelled to Istanbul, and he worked there for several years. He was an editor for a periodical called Al-Jawaib until that folded. He used to proofread the Arabic books for that press. He left Istanbul because he was appointed Qadi of Mosul, the district of Kawisa. Huh?
I said, subhanallah, I didn't know that. This part I didn't know.
Yeah. He didn't want to leave. I mean, he had to leave Constantinople because he got appointed as a judge in Iraq, in Mosul. But he did return back to Constantinople, but then he left again around 1300 Hijri, when the 1300 Hijri is about 1882, 83, something like that. So around the late 19th century, he left Istanbul and was appointed a judge in Ladiqiyya or Latakia. And then after there, he was there for about 5-6 years. The Dawla, i.e. the Ottoman state, transferred him to be the chief judge of Al-Qudus al-Sharif. And then, he never asked for these positions. He never ever requested anyone for these positions. He was given these positions. He was honored with these permissions. He was promoted to these positions without any request to the wali, to the sultan, to anyone, without any knowledge on his part. So he was chief judge, and then he was promoted again further to the Mahakim Shar'iyya in Beirut. He was chief judge of Beirut, and then he kind of retired from that position later on, and then he travelled around to the Hijaz and other places, and he wrote books, and he died around 1932. So about 1350 Hijri, yeah. So he was put in a lot of positions, and he travelled extensively in the Sham region, and he studied with a lot of the shuyukh of his time, the top shuyukh, who were very old actually at that time. So he got the last sort of belt of the top ulama of the time, even in their sort of later age. And so, yeah, and he wrote many works, and a lot of people know him because he was one of the greatest, not only muhaddith and fuqaha, but Sufi as well. And he wrote a lot of works on themes related to the beauty, the magnificence, the perfection, the wonder, the greatness, the azama of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And he wrote biographies of awliya, salihun, so saints of Allah, Sufis. He wrote about the fada'il, the virtues and the perfections of our Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. He wrote books on sending salawat on the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. He wrote, sort of litanies for Mawlid gatherings, and even till this day, his Mawlid litanies are read out. He wrote a commentary on the Shama'il of At-Tirmidhi, Ahsan al-Wasa'il. He wrote many poems. He wrote many arba'ins. He wrote, and I think we're hopefully going to be talking about one of them today. He wrote hadith compilations. He wrote proofs of prophethood, books on defending the nubuwwah of Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. So he wrote on in varied amounts of genres, different genres, yeah. But he's well known for his summary of Sufi works, his poems, and his rich collection of love and devotion to the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam. But as I hope to bring out as well today, there is another aspect to him which not many people know about, and that's his apologetic work for the Dawla Uthmaniyya, the Ottoman Dawla.
SubhanAllah, Sheikh, for some reason, I always thought that the Sufiya were more Hanafi. I never knew a scholar who's a Shafi'i.
No.
And the thing is, as you were describing this thing, you were saying that he traveled so much in the Levant. I was just in Syria, actually. I just came back 2 days ago, Sheikh. So, so I went through the whole area. I was in Idlib, and I was in Al-Bab, and I was in Akhtarin, and I was in, so I was just, and even till now, subhanAllah, there's some amazing scholars still there, no matter what the situation has been. So I also see the effects of Sufism within the Syrian culture also, in general. When we talk about the litanies that you were talking about, it's very common still in the masajid and also in the gatherings, and the poetry, and especially about the Prophet ﷺ, praising. It's very common, subhanAllah, Shaykh, in the masajid and in general. Just in gatherings.
Definitely, he's known for that, and he had a big influence on, people see Qadi Yusuf al-Nabhani, rahimahullah, as a kind of yardstick for Sunni orthodoxy. If you align with Imam Qadi Yusuf al-Nabhani, then that's a marker of Sunniness. And if you are away from Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani, rahimahullah, it's a marker that you're probably not, you're probably going to go wide off the mark. So he's seen as a yardstick for Sunnism. Definitely in the Muslim world, in the Levant, even in India. So, for example, many, he's revered highly across the board, all spectrums in India. So he really is seen as this unifying Sunni marker, a Sunni orthodoxy.
SubhanAllah. Sheikh, let's go to the book that we want to discuss. It says, the 40 narrations on the obligation to obey the ruler, or in this case, the Khalifa, by Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani. Sheikh, so what is the book, Sheikh? And first of all, Sheikh, the idea of writing the Arba'in, where did this come from, Sheikh?
Oh, that was, there's a hadith, though of course it's going to be weak. The ulama said that there was a hadith that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was attributed as saying that sort of memorizes or preserves for my ummah 40 hadith related to the religion, then Allah Azza will resurrect him on Yawm al-Qiyamah in the company of the fuqaha and the ulama. You can see. So the ulama took this as a sort of a as a good deed to do.
Then it became a tradition.
And so, yeah, definitely, to put it simply. And so, yeah, so من حفظ على أمة حديثا من أمر دينه بعث الله يوم القيامة فقيها عالما ومن حفظ على أمة 40 حديثا من السنة حتى يؤديها إليهم كنت له شفيعا أو شهيدا يوم القيامة. There's another riwayah that says whoever memorizes and preserves my ummah 40 hadith relating to the sunnah 40 من حفظ على أمتي 40 حديثا من السنة from the sunnah, yeah, حتى يؤديها إليهم, until he conveys it to others, then on the day of judgment كنت له شفيعا أو شهيدا يوم القيامة. And Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam says I'll be an intercessor for that person. من نقل عني, whoever sort of the other sort of riwayah version is من نقل عني, whoever transmits me, whoever transmits from me 40 hadith, he will be resurrected في زمرة العلماء, in the company of the scholars, or في جملة الشهداء, and amongst the shuhada, he'll be raised up amongst the shuhada. So there are many other versions with different wordings. من حفظ على أمتي 40 حديثا ينفعهم الله عز وجل بها قيل له ادخل من أي أبواب الجنة شئت. Whoever preserves for my ummah, 40 hadith, which
enter any
Allah
door
benefits
of
them with. Yeah, go into any door of Jannah that you wish.
That you wish.
And so, yeah, and so it comes sort of from this sort of understanding that whoever then can preserve 40 hadiths for the ummah, from whatever reason, then Allah, they hope to attain those promises, as mentioned in these ahadith al-sharifa. So, there are weaknesses in these transmissions, but some ulama have said, they become strengthened when considered collectively together, and therefore they become sort of, have this sort of maqbula amma, this general status amongst the muhaddithun. And in any case, the greatest ulama of the ummah took that as an ishara to memorize, to put together, these sort of ahadith al-sharif. So Imam Yusuf al-Nabhani compiled 40 arba'ins. So 40 of them, in fact, probably 42.
40.
And he printed it himself, yeah.
Different books.
So 40 hadiths, compilations, yeah. And one of them is, al-arba'in fi ta'ati amir al-mu'mineen, 40 hadiths on, the obligatory nature to obey the Amir al-Mu'mineen, i.e. the Sultan, the Khalifa. And he's got many, like al-Ahadith al-Arba'in, fi Fadl al-Jihad wal-Mujahideen, 40 narrations on the immense virtue of Jihad and the Mujahideen. You've got al-Arba'in, min Ahadith Sayyid al-Mursaleen, 40 hadiths on the Messenger of Allah. Then he's got 40 حديثا في 40 صيغة في الصلاة على النبي, 40 narrations on 40 wordings of sending salawat on the Messenger of Allah. 40 حديثا في فضائل أهل بيت, the 40 narrations on the virtues and excellence of the Ahl Bayt. He's written on Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu an. He's written one on 40 حديثا في فضل أبي بكر وعمر radiyallahu anhuma. Fadl Ali, he's written it on La ilaha illallah, he's written it 40 on the Aqidah, he's written so many hadiths, he's written on lots of different topics. And so one of them is Al-40 fi ta'ati Amir al-Mu'mineen, and that's little known. Some years ago when I translated, I asked many people about it. They'd never heard of it. They'd never heard of that 40. So it's part of a collection of
why
40 a collection of 40 Rawahid.
Sheikh, why is this? I mean, obviously we're discussing him. Why is this book important today, specifically at a time when the Amir al-Mu'minin is missing? Why does this book become, I guess, even more important than it was when it was written at the time when there is an Amir al-Mu'minin?
You ask a very, very good Sheikh, and I think to understand that book, that small Arba'in is a marker, is a sort of pointer about the broader issues that were on at the time. Now, it might, if you permit me, to give a little.
Hold on, Sheikh, you're breaking. There's a lot of. I don't know. Is that from our side or?
I'm not sure. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah. Go ahead. Continue. Continue.
Sorry, just let me know if there's any sort of. So I think, if you may permit me for a little bit, if I can sketch the sort of political context and events of 19th century and early 20th century, that will give us an idea of how to situate this work, this small Arba'in. So what we need to know is that the late 19th century, and here the Dawla Uthmaniyya, the Ottoman Caliphate, the Dawla Uthmaniyya Khilafah, the Ottoman Khilafah, we need to know a few things about it. One, the Ottoman was in decline. Its military power had declined, and this is well documented. For example, there are lots of works written on it, and there are lots of experts on who can tell us the reasons. But some, just to mention, the military defeats and sort of territorial losses. So the Russo-Turkish wars, for example, is one. The Ottoman Dawla faced several defeats against Russia, and it was quite devastating. The Ottomans lost Crimea. You had the Greek War of Independence. This was around 1820s, 1829. But so we're talking about early 19th century. So the Greek War of Independence, that resulted in the loss of Greece. And then that, historians were saying, that was an indication of the weakening grip of the Ottomans over sort of European territories. The Crimean War, the mid-19th century, is around 1853, 1856. Although the Dawla was supported by Britain and France, was victorious against Russia, it exposed how weak and sort of inefficient the Ottoman military system was. Then you had the early 20th century Balkan Wars. The Dawla Uthmaniyya, they lost nearly all of the European territories, shrinking its military strength and its political reach and power. And then you had other things going on as well. You had things like internal reforms, the Tanzimat reforms. So the Ottoman government was attempting to modernize its military and its administrative structures through the Tanzimat reforms, and they were introducing new training methods, modernizing the army, centralizing and streamlining the administration. You had, under Sultan Mahmud II, I believe, the Janissary Corps being abolished. This was an outdated, increasingly rebellious military unit, and this was part of the broader military reforms. You had what's known as a European encroachment. So the Dawla Uthmaniyya was increasingly relying on European financial loans and aid, but that loan, like with all things from Europe, comes with strings attached, and that was weakening Dawla Ottoman suzerainty, Ottoman power. Then you got the European powers militarizing their sort of states. Britain, France, and Russia, had colonial ambitions. They wanted to carve up the Ottoman territories so they can increase their grip. So these were sort of Ottoman sort of problems, you could say, at the time, reaching into the early 20th century. And then you've got, as with all things, you've got the British as well on the other side of the world, in India. You got the British expansion in India, right? So the mid-18th century, you got the East India Company. They established their control over India. And, sort of made firm their grip over India. The British consolidated their power, through a series of wars against local kingdoms and confederacies. Then you got the revolt, the 1857 revolt, the Sipahi revolt. This was a major incident, although it was ultimately unsuccessful. The revolt, sort of the East India Company rule after the rebellions, kind of pretty much, sort of shifted into outright British control. You had the British Raj now, so the East India Company shifting, and then you had now the Government of India Act 1858, where the British Raj in effect was established, and Queen Victoria was the Empress in 1876 or 77, 1877, I think it is. Now, what's this got to do with the Ottoman Dawla? Well, Britain sought to use the Ottoman Dawla as a kind of buffer against Russia expanding towards India, because Russia had Indian interests. So the Ottoman territories were used as a buffer. And so the Ottoman Dawla was, went into alliances with Britain and France during that time. And so really giving up a lot of its power and putting it in the hands of the Europeans. Britain, by that time anyway, had interests in the Middle East, the Suez Canal. Sorry, go on, Sheikh.
No. Go ahead. No, I'm listening. This is important.
Yeah. So you had the Suez Canal. Taking control of the Ottoman territories was even more crucial for Britain to protect the route to India, right? That's the quickest route to get to India. And then Britain, of course, like with Britain today, they supported reformist movements within the belly of the Ottoman Dawla. They wanted to stoke tensions within the heartlands, fund sort of different sentiments to sort of break up the territory from within. Then you've got, what else have you got? Then you've got the sort of Middle Eastern sort of Arabian issue. You got the Najdi Saudi Imara, rivaling the Ottoman Dawla. So you've got, for example, the sort of the first Saudi state, you could say, being established around about the mid 18th century, and it was the first Saudi state was established around about 1744, and this was an alliance between Muhammad bin Saud and Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. The great sort of, this is where the Wahhabi movement comes from. They spread rapidly, challenging various religious practices that are allowed in the Dawla Uthmaniyya. In 1803. The Saud, the first Saudi state, captured Mecca and Medina. They were under obviously Ottoman control, and then they were showing now signs of a direct sort of challenge to the Ottoman authority, not only to the authority, to the religious legitimacy. So the Ottomans were the traditional protectors of the Haramain Sharifain, but this new Saudi Dawla or Emirate was emerging to push out the Ottomans from the territory. But the Ottomans responded, and they were alarmed at the rise of this sort of movement. And we see why later on, why Yusuf al-Nabhani rahimahullah was very anti-Wahhabi. Can you see? He was very anti-Wahhabi. Anyway, the Ottomans managed to catch back, sort of recapture these territories again, and Muhammad Ali Pasha was tasked with that mission. It was successful, and the Ottoman forces were able to successfully defeat that first Saudi Dawla, and they destroyed their capital, Dir'iyah, and that marked the end of the first Saudi state. Then you have the second Saudi state, so-called Saudi state, established 1824 to around 1890. And this was established in 1824 by Turki ibn Abdullah. He rebuilt the Saudi Imara and made Riyadh his capital now, yeah? And they were constantly in conflict with the Ottomans. So, so what the Ottomans did was, they stoked the internal sort of Arabian sort of tension. The Ottomans sided with a dynasty, the Rashidi dynasty, the early Rashid. They allied with the Ottomans, and that helped overcome the second Saudi state. And then you had the third Saudi state being established from 1902 until we have now the present, and that was Abdul Aziz ibn Saud, and he captured Riyadh, and he established Riyadh as a capital of the modern Saudi state. They slowly consolidated power, and by then the Ottomans in the early 20th century had declined considerably anyway, and so slowly, they were able to recapture the Hijaz, other territories, and then take over all of what we now call Saudi Arabia. But what was happening at the time was the Wahhabi movement was challenging Ottoman orthodoxy, because the Wahhabi movement was to purify Islam of what they saw was bid'ah and khurafat. So, religious accretions and unwanted innovations and corruptions, and especially Sufi rituals. Ta'zeem al-awliya, respecting and venerating the saints, visiting, tombs, ziyarah to tombs. So the Wahhabis came along and said these were practices bordering on shirk, and so the Ottomans had no religious. They weren't religiously orthodox. They had no religious authority. So they were not seen as protectors of Sunni Islam anymore. So anyway, so you start to see the challenge of the Ottoman, not only political power, but Ottoman religious legitimacy.
Just credibility.
So by taking control of Mecca and Medina again by the Wahhabis, that challenged, everyone saw that as a challenge to Ottoman claim for religious legitimacy. They were no longer the protectors of the Haramain al-Sharifain. So and plus other local alliances within the region meant the Ottomans now were not seen, didn't have any influence in the Shibh al-Jazirat al-Arab, the Arabian Peninsula. So anyway, you had that issue for the Ottomans. And then I'll mention just a couple more, and that will give us an idea of what's going on. You then had the kind of semi-autonomous status of Egypt. So Egypt was almost like a sort of a nominally autonomous province of the Ottoman Empire, even though it was formerly part of the Dawla. Egypt enjoyed a great degree of autonomy under the rule of Muhammad Ali, and that began early in 19th century. So Muhammad Ali, wanted to modernize Egypt, that region. He wanted to establish, and he did, a strong modernized military. He initiated economic reforms. He was more open to external influences, external collaboration, i.e. collaboration with the Europeans. He helped with the British as well to construct the Suez Canal, and that made Egypt, the region of Egypt, strategically important. But he also borrowed a lot, and that allowed European intervention to come in because you're borrowing their money, you're now under their control. So the Europeans wanted to now oversee the Egyptian finances. This intervention undermined, sort of the kind of rule the Khedive Ismail's rule at the time, and then ultimately the Ottoman authority as well. Then Ismail Khedive was deposed under the pressure from Britain and France. The Sultan Abdul-Hamid deposed him and replaced him with his son Tawfiq Pasha. At that time as well, you had nationalist uprisings going on, and anti-Arab sentiments, and you had Arab revolts going on. So all sorts of things were going on. And finally, to sort of mention, you had the internal Turkish, the growth of the Young Turks, and and this is where modern history, most people will know about the Ottoman Empire because of the Young Turks. By the early 19th century, by the late 19th century, early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was increasingly viewed as a sick man of Europe, struggling internally in terms of internal decay. People didn't like Sultan Abdul-Hamid. They saw him as an autocratic ruler. He was seen as an autocrat, and you had young coalitions of internal Turkish citizens forming a kind of resistance group. They wanted to make a new vision for Turkey. They wanted to modernize and democratize the Ottoman Empire. In effect, they wanted to get rid of the Sultan. And then they led the Young Turks in around 1908, they led a successful revolt against the Sultan Abdul-Hamid, forcing him pretty much to restore a kind of secular parliament and marking an era of a kind of constitutional Turkey. These Young Turks in their revolution began to implement reforms aimed at modernizing Turkey, secularizing Turkey, nationalizing Turkey. And after 1908, you start to see now a rise in nationalism, anti-Arab sentiments, and that anti-Arab sentiments provoked Arabs to revolt against the Turks. And all this was happening while World War I began as well in the sort of 1916 to 1918. So all these things that I just did a hodgepodge of in about 10 minutes.
No, Sheikh, that's amazing. That's
internal tensions going on.
I
winged it a bit. Sorry for the Ottoman scholars and historians, but being a history teacher, I just winged it off the top of my head.
That's I wish I could wing it like that.
Basically, I'm trying to say the Dawla Osmaniya was in trouble.
You just redefined the definition of winging. But here's the thing. So, mashallah, tabarakallah.
So all this was happening, right?
Hold on, before I forget this, Sheikh, let me ask you this. Now, with all of this happening, and so that, okay, tell me, Sheikh, so he is, in some ways, he's also Sufi, and of course, and he knows the Shafi'i fiqh, he knows what's happening. But Sheikh, this is not how we see. Again, we are going a bit, to maybe another topic. I'll bring you back. But when we look at the Sufi scholars today, we don't see that kind of awareness of what's happening around the Muslims and what's happening in the Muslim lands, and the politics of it, the economics of it, the wars that are happening. And then obviously it's very much related when he's writing a book on Amir al-Mu'mineen and things like that. So is there also a shift in Sufism, Sheikh, after this era of, let's say, nation-state formation by the British?
I mean, regionally it's different. I mean, remember, so the Ottomans were very pro-Sufis, right? The Dawla Uthmaniyya was, very, very embedded, with tasawwuf. It's in the veins of the Ottoman Dawla. So yeah, there was strong sentiment for the Sultan, for sure, in the territories, for sure. Now, how it played out in other former, what they call former territories of the Ottoman Empire, former territories, is varied. It's varied. But unfortunately now we do see, we're talking about early 21st century, we do see a kind of secularizing tendency among some scholars of tasawwuf, for sure. But I think by and large, my assessment is this: most ulama, accept that, the legitimate ruler for all of Muslims is a singular leader. Can you see? Is a singular leader. So, for example, the Naqshbandi Sufis of Turkey, they believe the restoration of the Sultan is a big priority. Can you see? The Naqshbandi, the Ottoman the Naqshbandi Sufis, like Haqqani Sufis, they believe that, the Sultan has to be restored. The authority of the Sultan has to be restored. And the absence of the Sultan has meant all Muslims are weak. We're being exploited. The Muslim lands are being conquered. Muslim lands are being controlled. We're being oppressed because we have no authority to protect us, because that is one of the functions of the Sultan, to protect the territories.
Muslim lands. Sure.
So you find that, definitely. And they invest the Sultan in almost a kind of cosmic significance. They take that understanding of the Sultan, Dhillullahi fil ard, the Sultan being the shade of Allah on the earth, to another level. So you get these conflicting tendencies, definitely, amongst the ulama of tasawwuf. But at the time of Yusuf al-Nabhani, no one disagreed that there shouldn't be a singular leadership for the Muslim Ummah. So Yusuf al-Nabhani was appointed by the Sultan at the time, Sultan Abdul-Hamid, to do that work. So you see, one of the things that happened, of all the things that I mentioned, was the decline in Ottoman military power, the rise in nationalist movements within Turkey, the Arab revolts, the challenging of the Ottoman authority from Al Saud, the colonial powers, wanting to go deeper and deeper into the Ottoman territories, challenging the Wahhabi movement, challenging the religious legitimacy of the Ottoman Dawla. All these things gave the picture that the Sultan was no longer a legitimate authority for all of Islam. He's no longer a Khalifa. You see? And so now Yusuf al-Nabhani rahimahullah, writing that Arba'in, becomes significant, because even if you have an ailing Sultan, you still have to obey him if he's the Khalifa, if he's the rightful Khalifa, right?
He's the Sultan.
If he's the Amir al-Mu'mineen. Yeah, sorry, go on.
So no, go ahead. So he's writing the 40 hadith that he's writing, Sheikh. Can you go over some of them that I'm sure you've been through this. So so does he do it with the isnad, Sheikh, or is he just he's just?
Yeah, these are well-known hadiths. Yeah, he doesn't, in his arba'ins, he says he doesn't put the isnads in because they're taken from well-known collections of hadith. Okay. You see, although he has isnad, he's a muhaddith, rahimahullah, but in those 40 arba'in, he doesn't put the isnads. And that was a practice amongst all the ulama. Because what you're doing in a hadith collection is that you're bringing the hadith from the well-known collections. Can you see? So he wrote that, he composed that Arba'in, and we can see what he's trying to do. See, so at the time, one of the things that the Ottoman Sultan done at the time, his policy was a kind of pan-Islam policy. You know, how does he become a unifying figure for all of Muslims? Can you see? So that becomes very, very important. And for Yusuf al-Nabhani, he saw lots of things trying to break up the authority of the Ottoman Dawla. He knew the West, they were trying to do that without a doubt, but he was worried about Muslims internally trying, from within. So this made him take a hard line. So he obviously attacked the Wahhabis because they were against the Ottoman authority. They fought against the Ottomans, and they rejected Tasawwuf. They rejected the theology of the Ottomans. They considered them to be, unorthodox. So he's attacking that strand. Another strand that he's attacking was the internal reformist movements. So individuals like Jamaluddin al-Afghani, his student Muhammad Abdu Surah Rashid Rida, and other intellectuals and thinkers and scholars at the time who were calling for a kind of a change to Islamic and Islamic. They're calling for actually a renewal, a change to Islam itself. So there was intellectual upheaval in the Islamic world around the 19th and 20th century. These reformist scholars engaged in rigorous debate about which direction we should take Islamic thought and practice. So Jamaluddin al-Afghani, for example, he was advocating for pan-Islamic unity and resistance against Western colonialism. That's true. But he argued that there was a decline in the Muslim world due to us becoming internally stagnated. And the only way we're going to revive is if we adopt aql as our guiding sort of instrument, adopt modern science and modern education. In addition, he emphasized a new ijtihad to reinterpret Islamic teachings that will address contemporary issues. Muhammad Abdul took up...
And it's kind of very, subhanAllah, it's ironic situation here. If we look at the work of Shaykh Al-Nabhani, for instance, and those who have adopted his thoughts, it seems like the same type of discussion is happening today, where some of the scholars, they may call for, the Muslims have to be united. They don't know what that really means, how they're going to do it. They have no clue. But then there is a new, almost, correct me if I'm wrong, almost a new methodology to do ijtihad, which could include Western methodology of reference taking, let's say, or even like, for instance, you have some scholars, without mentioning name, who are so amazed by the thoughts of Yale University, and then they're trying to bring that way of thinking into the ijtihadi, the method, the methods that the scholars have used in the past to reach a conclusion.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because under Muhammad Abdu, the student of Afghani, and Abdu was an Egyptian alim from Egypt, Al-Azhar. He was a leading figure in the reform movement. He wanted to, like his teacher, reconcile Islamic teachings with modern values and science. So one way he wanted to do that was to promote educational reform in Al-Azhar and pretty much everywhere where there were institutions. And he called for a reuse of ijtihad and reinterpretation of Quran and Hadith to align with contemporary needs. He believed that Islam was compatible with the aql and modernity, and he felt that the ulama had suffocated Islam, had put too much strictures and made Islam too strict. And so Abdul wanted to bring in reform through modernization of the educational system and obviously women's rights and things like that. But he wanted to reform fiqh, make it more flexible and responsive to modern life. And then the student of both Afghani and Abdul, Rashid Rida from Syria, he as well, taken up these ideas. He wanted to advocate a return to Islam, pure teachings, but emphasizing ijtihad, because a lot of the practices of Islam he felt were outdated, that the traditional scholars were continuing. And so he addressed the need for political reform and administrative reform. Now, what's this got to do with Yusuf al-Nabhani? Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani was utterly against these reformist movements. He felt not only were they bringing in Western education into the heartlands, this is why he wrote a book on the dangers of Western education, Western schools, because they corrupt the mind and the character of the believer. But he lambasted them. He even wrote a poem, Ar-Ra'iyya al-Kubra wa Ar-Ra'iyya al-Sughra. He wrote a poem in the ode of the style of that ends with the letter Ra, attacking these reformist individuals. I mean, he never minced his words against them. He thought they were doing, heinous work internally. And the reason why he was so against them as well, he felt this reform and renewal and new ijtihad was destabilizing the Ottoman authority. Not only was it destabilizing the Ottoman authority, because you're calling for a reform of the political system, he thought they were unraveling traditional Islam. He believed that these reformist scholars were trying to change Sufi practices, get them out, reform the Ottoman Dawla, and threatening the unity of the Muslims, because they're threatening the unity of the political unity of the Muslim. So he was against their call.
How do you reconcile? This is going to be a tough question, I'm sure. So you have the Muhammad Abdus of the time, Abdul Rashid Rida and these guys, and then on one side, then you have the Wahhabis who are saying that, look, this is all bid'ah, and this is, all of this has crept into the Ottoman Dawla. And then you have the Dawla itself, meaning Islamic State, the Ottoman state, is trying to grapple with both of the internal division that's happening, both intellectually and also physically, lands being taken. Sheikh, this is a big... there's a lot going on here. How?
Absolutely.
Was it almost can someone say, was it it's almost no way that the Ottoman state could have survived?
From the historical forces, internal pressures and tensions, and external pressures and tensions, it looks like an inevitable outcome, right? But what Yusuf Nabhani symbolizes is the last chance saloon. It's the last gasp attempt to remind Muslims of their obligation to their political authority. So you can see why he's attacking certain things. So these reformist scholars were calling for ijtihad, right? To reinterpret Islamic teachings in the light of modern challenges. Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani is like, what are you on? We don't need ijtihad. Classical fiqh is robust. Pre-modern fiqh is robust. We need taqleed instead of ijtihad, because he saw ijtihad as trying to undo the traditional structures of Islam. Can you see the traditional structures were being undone with fresh ijtihad?
Okay, so I guess it's not meaning what these guys, the modern thought processes, I guess.
Yeah. But the problem when you do that, when you insist on taqleed, you're doubling down on taqleed. Are you saying that no form of ijtihad is allowed? Because for him, new ijtihad was trying to undo the integrity and unity of Islamic law, of the Sharia, because you're undoing it through your fresh ijtihad, and by undoing it, you're undoing the authority that has established it.
So now today, when we look at, let's say if you look at the Hanafi tradition, many of the Ahnaf are still till today are against new ijtihad of any kind. They don't think there is need for any ijtihad. So was that they were trying to protect the dawla, I guess. They were trying to say that, okay, hold on. Okay,
very reactionary.
Okay, so that's also a problem. They're thinking, let's stop ijtihad because these guys are going to. They think, I think I'm thinking out loud here. So they're saying, okay, these guys who are doing or looking at ijtihad, they are going to dismantle the methodology that we already have intact, is what they were actually saying. Rather than, they didn't say don't do ijtihad, or at least they didn't mean it. They said stay with taqlid right now, for now, because of what's happening. If we allow this new thinking to occur, which makes the aql the main source of taking right and wrong.
Some of the ijtihad was different from the ijtihad of the usulis. Can you see? So you're right. So it's the kind of ijtihad they were calling for. The other tension or site of conflict that Yusuf al-Nabhani was rallying against, we're going to see how all this relates to contemporary times. Education and modernization. All the reformists were calling for modernizing the educational system, that including the Madaris, Al-Azhar al-Sharif, all the major educational institutions under the Ottomans and, former Ottoman territories. And that means like bringing in modern sciences, rational subjects. And Yusuf al-Nabhani, rahimahullah, thought, hang on, by bringing in, this is like a Trojan horse, by bringing in this modernization, what you're actually doing is you're diluting and westernizing traditional Islamic education. And by diluting it, traditional Islamic education, you're going to erode the values that old educational system brought about. So that's the second issue he was rallying against. The third one was the role of religion in politics. So people like Rashid Rida advocated for political reform, right? Establishing kind of modern Islamic state based on a renewed idea of Islamic law. Whereas Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani is like, no, you got the Khalifa. You need to obey him. You need to support the existing political structures of the Ottoman Dawla. He wanted to resist the change because it might destabilize it. You see? And then the final thing is Western influence. Is everything that comes from the West bad? Including technology, administrative practices? Could this strengthen Muslim bureaucracy, the way Muslims do their everyday sort of administrative governance and things like that? Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani was skeptical of anything that came from the West, seeing it as a threat to Islamic values and identity. So what you start to see 100 years ago, like we see now, the debate between traditionalists like Yusuf al-Nabhani rahimahullah and the reformists at the time, at a crucial juncture of Islamic history. The juncture is where the Ottoman Dawla is literally on its knees. There's a call for reform, to reinterpret Islam, to make Islam address contemporary issues, bring rationality in, bring Western whatever's good from the West. Whereas Imam Yusuf al-Nabhani is resisting these pushes and changes and pressures. He's defending traditional Islamic authority and power, classical scholarship.
I mean, he's not against. Okay. So when you're saying rationality, you mean making the mind the source.
Yeah. So bringing in sort of modern science, modern sort of philosophy and thought. And so those four things that I mentioned, the ijtihad and taqlid, education and modernization, the role of religion and politics, and Western, whatever comes from the West, Westernization we can call it. Yeah. Are we not? Do we not have the same debates and question happening now? Would you not agree?
Yeah, of course. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's so amazing, actually. I'm kind of, if I'm thinking about what's happening today, I mean, you have the same type of scholars, the same type of back and forth going on. Subhanallah, Sheikh, and it's
now that Arba'een that he wrote, the reason why it becomes significant is because he's the interlocutor. He's the officially appointed Ottoman, sort of spokesperson, interlocutor, communicator. Anything that's going to threaten the Dawla Uthmaniyya, he wants to resist that, and call for unity under obedience to the Amir. That's a natural thing. So he brings a hadith. Yeah, exactly. So he brings a hadith together to say, look, you got to obey the Amir. Without an Amir, this is what's going to happen. The European colonial powers are going to eat you up. They're going to eat you up.
So what's he saying?
You're going to weaken.
Let's make this the final point, because it's already 5 something. I know you have to be somewhere. And there has to be a continuation of this discussion. I mean, this is only I think the first 5 questions here. We have so much more. Subhanallah. I was just, oh man, it just skipped my mind. It was a very important question, Sheikh. Subhanallah. But go on. Tell me.
No. What I was going to say, in case it comes back, inshallah, is what was I going to say now? So now I'm just stuck. What I was going to say.
Yeah.
So this Arba'in, Afwan. It shows you, this Arba'in shows the centrality of the Khilafah itself. The centrality of it. That, Imam Yusuf al-Nabhani, rahimahullah, even in this latter stage, is trying to get Muslims to remember where their allegiance lies. And that's why he brings a hadith about, obeying, you can't disrespect the Sultan. You got to obey whoever's in authority over you, even if they're Abyssinian slave. We give bay'ah, sam'a wa ta'a. He brings that hadith. If somebody sees in his ruler something bad, they have to, whether good or bad, you have to accept that. That's not a reason to dethrone or bring down the Sultan, the Amir. Rulers will be appointed over you. Huh? Sorry, go on.
Of course, here we're talking about the Khalifa here, but here, why was it? This is the final question here, Sheikh. The modernists, or let's say at the time, the supposed or so-called intellectuals you're looking at again, and Muhammad Abdu here, and Abdul Rashid Ridda, and some of the others, and then when you look at the thought process of the ulama, such as Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani here, Sheikh, I mean, why? When we think of thought processes in general, right? when we, for instance, when we study usul al-tafkir from Shaykh Nabhani, when we look at how we come to a conclusion by studying the reality, and then the need for senses, and the need for distinguishing mind, the need for previous information, and then coming to a concept, to changes behavior, all these things that we discuss. Sheikh, I mean, were the Muslims or the supposed the reformists, were they not able to see the reality of what damage that could come about by if the Ottomans fall? They could not see this, or was that not in their? They couldn't imagine it falling, or they didn't realize that this kind of discussion could bring the end of the Ottoman Caliphate?
Well, you got to look at it from the reformist perspective. They're seeing Islamic authority waning, crumbling. And they're seeing an ascendancy of Western powers, Western nations. So one is declining, one is ascending. So some of them are thinking, and obviously I'm simplifying this, but some of them are thinking, right, the other Western nations, European nations must be doing something right. They must be doing something right. So we need to look to them to see what is it that they're getting right. Is it because our institutions are outdated? Is it because we have stopped thinking, we stopped using reason? Is it because we haven't embraced science? Is it because? What are the factors that Muslims, reformers thought at that time, if they took or emphasized, they would bring back or restore Muslim fortunes again? So they probably had in their mind, and they probably knew that, Islamic authority will either crumble or change. But they all believed it had to change. How that change looked, of course, they differed. That's the question, like we ask today. What is it that Muslims need to restore their political fortunes again, to come back, a restitution of, go back on the global stage again? That's what a lot of people are thinking. And now, how do we bring back Islam on a civilizational level? And their reformists are seeing that the Muslim civilization is just waning away because the Ottomans, is sinking in the quicksand. So they could see it, but they never saw themselves as internal bombs that are going to ignite and destroy the Islamic authority. They didn't see themselves as like that. They didn't see themselves as a destructive force. They saw themselves as a constructive force. We can rebuild a new vision of Islam in the modern age. Whereas Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani is like, what are you doing? You're slowly you're loosening the bolts. You want to bring in ijtihad. You want to reinterpret Islam, Islamic practices and values and teachings and laws. You want to modernize the educational system. You want to westernize it, according to him. You want to change the structures of the Ottoman Dawla, etc., etc. So he's seeing these changes as a stripping away of Ottoman authority. But the reformists never saw it like that. The reformists looked at it as a necessary change. So now the question is, Sheikh, not necessarily who's right or who's wrong, you might say. The question is, is there a way to now understand what makes Islam relevant for every age? What is it that we can leave behind? And what is it that we have to take forward? For Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani, it seems like you can't leave anything behind. Can you see? It's got to be a wholesale maintenance of things as they are. Whereas the reformists said, no, we can leave a lot of the things behind. And we can go forward with something new and different, changed, modified. That's the question now. And who sets that agenda out?
Okay, this has to be the next topic. Inshallah, next
inshallah.
discussion. And this
is
because the thing is, so now the part 2 of this will be, we get to the roots of who's right and what did they mean at the time, and what. See, the thing, Sheikh, here is that I guess I want to make sure that the audience understand the importance of having a thought process that is coming from the Aqidah at all times. And that would have put those who are calling for reform on fine. We understand there might have been need for some changes, whether it's modernizing the physical infrastructure of the state. That could be something different, because unfortunately, Sheikh, today we also see this, that people they can't seem to understand there's a difference when we are talking about, when people talk about modernization, they may mean we need to rebuild our infrastructure. But
yes.
Instead of saying, we need to we're not trying to change the infrastructure of Islam, meaning that we're not trying to change the Aqidah of Islam, and because if you do that, this is what happens. I think that's what Sheikh Taqi, Yusuf Nabhani is saying that, look, you're not just talking about, okay, we need to build better buildings and we need to modernize or we need to get with the technology. What you're actually saying is that if we go with what you're saying, we're not going to even have the Aqidah of Islam. Am I getting this right?
So on your point, so what Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani was worried about, to put it in a nutshell, is change is happening, social, economic, political, educational change is happening, and those who are spearheading it are somehow disintegrating Islamic identity and Islamic polity, i.e. the body polity. Now, the crucial question is this: what cognitive cartography must we have? What I mean by that is, do we take a reformist approach where everything's got to be modernized along the Western pattern? Or do we take Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani line, is where you lock and bolt and try and keep everything in and protect it? Because that's the only way, by sealing the parameter, that's the only way you're going to protect the Dawla, Islamic identity, Islamic practice, everything that's been, happening until the early 19th century. Are both of these extremes, if you want to call it, of the spectrum, are they right? So that I think we need to think about, because the way we answer that question, how do we navigate forward, that's going to determine for us, what can be taken from an external civilization or an external culture or something, whatever you want to call it, society, and what can't be taken. That's in effect the question. And that's crucial for Yusuf al-Nabhani. Not anything coming out of the West is suspicious. You got to reject it. And you made the comparison with the ulama of the Hanafis in India. Similar, traditionalist scholars pushing back on anything that's supposedly Western. Right?
There is a lot going on, Sheikh. I mean, inshallah, we have to, of course, I think we have to do second series to this, part 2 to this, because, from what you're saying, from what I got from the whole here, this discussion, there is a discussion that's going on within the traditionalist. So within the school, let's say in this case, Deoband school. I mean, there's so much now across the whole spectrum. What happens from the formation of Deoband to where Deoband is today. I don't think if the original Deoband scholars come along today, they would not recognize the ones that are there today. At least from what I...
Oh, really?
There is... Oh, my goodness. Anyway, that's my understanding, at least how I'm reading things. Because I think, look, it went from being able to take things from the Aqidah to... Actually, if you look at a lot of the scholars today, even from the Deobandi tradition, they have, unfortunately, without them even knowing, or some knowingly, have made the mind literally the organ that makes decisions for what's right and what's wrong, and they may not even know it. And we see that. I mean, it's unfortunate, but we see that. And then you have this whole the issue of ijtihad, and what happened when we went away from the methodology of ijtihad, and what happened to the idea of abandoning ijtihad altogether. That's a whole different discussion that we need to have. And then the issue of those who tried to, when you look at the Wahhabi school, or when you look at even within the Wahhabi school, when you look at the Madkhalis, and what happened to that? That's another discussion that you could have, almost what happened to, in some ways, to the Deobandis. So, Sheikh, there's all of this. We need to kind of break apart and discuss it one by one.
Right. What I thought I wanted to do, if people don't know about the book, maybe read the Arba'een fi Ta'at al-Amir al-Mu'mineen. It's a wonderful collection of 40 hadith. But I just wanted to bring out that behind a text, there's all this background that we talked about, which obviously I rambled on. It wasn't very coherent or systematic, but I wanted to just bring that behind the text there's all these issues going on. And why is it relevant? Going back to the question you asked at the beginning about how we should approach studying a scholar, like should we approach it with thoughtfulness and deep thinking? We should, because by studying what's happened at the time that Imam Yusuf al-Nabhani rahimahullah was, that will give us insights into, right, how do we now tackle the issue of modernity now? He reacted the way he did, rahimahullah, when it came to his doorstep. He was doubling down, pushing out what he felt was external influence, westernization, modernity, saving the political unity, integrity of the Dawla Ottomaniyya. Whereas us now as an ummah, what do we do with the challenge that we face now? Do we double down, or do we have more deeper thinking that we need to make that might agree with something that the reformers have said, or disagree, or agree with Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabhani, or disagree with him?
SubhanAllah. All right, brothers, inshallah, and my sisters, we're going to end this discussion here, but this is an amazing discussion that we need to continue because there's a lot that needs to be unpacked. So again, the book that we were discussing, or at least we were trying to make sure we understand the background of the book, why the Shaykh decided to write this book, what was happening, the political situation at the time, the situation of the Dawla, and the Ottoman Empire or the Ottoman Khilafah at the time, and all of the things that are happening in the East and the West, and the development of the modern thought in many ways. So inshallah, we will bring the Shaykh back, Dr. Chowdhury back for the discussion. Shaykh Chowdhury, wallah, jazakallah khair for your time. And we will see you guys next week, inshallah, next Jummah. Jazakallah khair, Shaykh. Jazakallah khair. Allah barak feek.
Barakallahu feekum.
لن يطول الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل الهمام نحن فينا عمر لا 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 لن يطول الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل الهمام نحن فينا عمر صبح بدا نور ظهر نجم وشمس وقمر ألقى على الدنيا الدرر هذا عمر هذا عمر كل البرايا تنتظر أيامه البيض الغرر كي تستفيد من العبر هذا عمر هذا عمر لا لن تدوم الجراح بل سيأتي الصباح نحن أهل الكفاح نحن فينا عمر لا لا لن تدوم الجراح بل سيأتي الصباح نحن أهل الكفاح نحن فينا عمر